There's no way right now in the United States that you're going to hear stories about Islam beyond certain topics right now. It's slowly changing, but very slowly. But the difference should be that the person who tells the story, so if you're going to tell a story about Pakistan, the person who tells the story should be Pakistani. Why? Because mentally then, when you're watching the story, you're in cognitive dissonance. That maybe something bad is happening over there, but the person who's telling me the story is from over there, which means that this place is complicated. Right? And if the perception of you is all bad and it goes to complicated, it's better. Do you see what I'm saying? In 2008, when Obama was running for president, there was a famous incident. Well, there were two famous incidents. One was he hired someone to be his national Muslim outreach director. And the person he hired, a guy named Mazen Asbahi, his Syrian guy, it turned out that he was on the board of a masjid whose other board member once had falafel with a guy whose uncle drove a cab that had a guy from Hamas in it. Right? Literally no connection to anything, right? The most ridiculous thing in the world, right? At some point, somebody knows someone who's crazy, right? At one point you were in the shopping mall and so was that serial killer. Therefore you're a serial killer, right? So literally that was the logic. And within 2 days, the Obama campaign dumped him, right? And then around the same time, there were two women in hijab behind Obama for a presentation, a panel, right? And the campaign removed them. They said, we don't want you in the shot. Because we're already getting all this flack because people think Obama is Muslim, right? So we don't want people to have that image right now because we need to win an election and we don't really care what happens to you. The Clinton campaign, and I have reservations about Hillary Clinton and happy to discuss them, but two things she's done differently. And this is a sign of how much the country has changed and how much the planet is changing, is that she hired a national Muslim outreach director. He was attacked. She didn't do anything. She said, suck it up. I want Muslim votes. He's going to get them. Deal with it. The second thing she did is that she could have attacked Donald Trump herself. She picked a Pakistani guy, Khizr Khan, you've probably seen him, to tell his story. He criticized Donald Trump, and Donald Trump fired back, and he kept criticizing him. And people ate it up. Now, in a sense, it's viral and it came out of nowhere, but in another sense, it didn't. It was years and years and years and years and years of effort by all these different communities of color, going back to someone like Muhammad Ali, who stood up for X, Y, and Z, all the way to the present to get to a point where there's a presidential candidate who now goes out of her way to put in every ad someone visibly Muslim in all of her ads. Now, she could simply say, I disagree with Donald Trump and X, Y, and Z. She doesn't have to physically include Muslims. Does that mean that you should or I should or anyone should agree with all of her policies? Absolutely not. But it does mean that the climate is shifting, that people now have to include voices they would have never included before. What you do with that inclusion is up to you. But the point is first that the narrative, whatever narrative you see around you, is not going to survive, it's not going to be permanent. It never happens that way. Something that looks to be dominant and unchallengeable for 10 years later looks absolutely ridiculous. If you told people 20 years ago that China was going to be on the verge of being the world's next superpower, most people would have laughed in your face. They would have laughed. They're like, what are you smoking? And can I have some? Right? Astaghfirullah. But look at that. 20 years is not a long time. And the world completely changed. There's a famous show, Family Guy, cartoon. There's a great episode where one of the cartoon characters, he travels back in time. He says, I'm from the future. And they're like, yeah, prove it. He's like, how? What's the president's name? He goes, Barack Hussein Obama. And he's like, pfft. Right? What the hell kind of name is that? Right? Who in the hell would elect a president named Barack Hussein Obama? Right? Things change. That doesn't mean they change all the way or they change overnight, but they change. The work you do and whatever work you do and the way you represent yourself and your country and your culture and your identity, is it in a way that other people can hear and that is ready for the moment when it is needed? Because at some point, your story will be needed. Will that story be available when people need it? When people ask themselves what is really going on, who's going to tell the story? Very simple final example, the burkini ban in France, right? The New York Times did a story on it. The New York Times gets about 20 or 30 million readers a month, so it's a pretty substantial website in the United States. Normally, they would have reported on this story and been done with it. This time, what they did is they reported on the story and then did an article of just how Muslim women in Europe are responding. The whole article is just what people wrote in response. which would have never happened 10 years ago. Many of these people are 22, 23 years old. They have Instagram accounts, they have Twitter accounts, they have Facebook accounts, they're social media personalities who have their 5 minutes of fame now, right? Because they're now known publicly. What they do with that is their business, but they entered the narrative because someone was looking for their story, and they told their story. Thank you very much. That's it. Do I have time? Any questions?
I would like you to comment on that what small roles or what small clips or what small things we should start putting on the internet. And of course, it gives you social media power and fame at the same time. But what is our responsibility as a different narrative that has to be shown to the world, because now we are suddenly being looked at? Yeah. So a little bit of comment as to a little guidance as what these people should be doing from where you stand. Thank you.
I'd say a few things. One is there's always a moment when someone suddenly wants to know something, right? When a story enters the public consciousness. Many things about Pakistan are completely unknown in the United States. Completely unknown, right? So Pakistan's diversity is completely unknown. The fact that we do not speak Arabic is largely unknown, right? Like, all these things are unknown. So even the most basic elements of Pakistani existence, like this gathering, would be surprising to people. And that's really depressing, right? Now, that will change and is changing, right? But one of the things you can do is that whenever something happens in the news, produce content that explains what happened, right? Like, actually explain what happened. Show people physically what it looks like. You know, remember the movie Zero Dark 30? Right? Like, any movie that's set in Pakistan, that's set in Islamabad, is suddenly set in, like, I don't know, like Libya. I'm like, it's not a desert, right? Like, it's like a completely different topography, right? It's as if you were to set a movie in Miami and film it in Canada. Like, it makes no sense, right? Like, this is, you know what I mean? Like, it's not even, like, something as simple as, like, hey, this is actually Islamabad, not that, right? If enough people do it, it will get picked up, and it will humiliate and embarrass the people who produce the content, because it will show them that they're ignorant. And usually the person who signs the check has no idea what's going on. And I don't mean that in a dismissive sense, because now I'm getting fired. What I mean is, the person who signs the check is not able to oversee every story, right? Like, if you run MSNBC, right? You don't really follow the news in every single part of the world. Of course you can't, because you can't be an expert on everything. You're an expert on running a business. But if there's a social media campaign that says, hey, your channel or your media or your film did X, Y, and Z, and it's not even offensive, it's just wrong, right? That person now has to answer for that. Like, well, why did you make a movie that's speaking the wrong language? Right? And no one notices until someone pushes back. Why did the New York Times write the piece on how Muslim women in Europe are responding to the burkini ban? Some wear hijab, some don't, some are religious, some are not, some are completely secular, atheist, some are super religious, like every different kind of person. Why? Because there was such an outpouring of commentary that they had to respond, and moreover, they thought it was interesting to respond, right? So I would say as simple as sometimes when a story hits, or something that bothers you, and you know the mood, I mean, you know what's on your Facebook, like, you know, what people are talking about, like, push back, right? Be like, no, that's crap. That's not accurate. This is not my experience. Or just explain, right? Like, here's 5 things you didn't know about Pakistan or about Islamabad or about being Pakistani or about being a college student in Pakistan, and encourage a lot of people to do it. Now, it may very well be, and this is the really frustrating thing about media, that 90% of the time it won't be picked up, right? But you learn how to do it and you do it better, right? It's not like you suddenly, right, like one day become amazing at something, right? It takes years and years and years and years and years before you can do something, right? I never wanted to get into media. I have severe social anxiety. I was having a heart attack before this speech started. It's okay, I'm being honest with you, right? I didn't want to do this. I liked my little club. I was in college and I became president of the Muslim club in college, right? And I was like, oh, you know, I'm just going to do like some cool events and I'll just get married, right? That was like my real motivation. I was like, this way I'll find a wife, because my parents were not going to help me. But anyway, my dad was like, you can't get married till you're a doctor. And then I didn't want to be a doctor, so I couldn't tell him, so I couldn't get married. So I had to get married on my own. See, everyone's real motivation comes out. So I'm elected the president of the club. It's like 100 people in New York City, and my third day is 9/11. And we were the largest Muslim community within walking distance of Ground Zero. So suddenly, like my friend Ali was like, "Oh, you're gonna die now," right? He's like, "Good job," right? Then he just left, right? And then Ali now works in Dubai. Salam Ali. So anyway, that was like my trial by fire, because suddenly someone sticks a mic in your face, and they'll like explain everything, like Iraq, Palestine, jihad, Sharia, polygamy, Pakistan, India, everything, like in 5 seconds. I was like a 21-year-old kid. I had no idea what the hell was going on, right? Like most awkward human being on the planet. I just like watching Star Trek and like drawing pictures. That was like my whole life, right? I didn't even like talking to people, right? I could barely hold a conversation or make eye contact, and suddenly I was thrust into this, right? So like to where I am now from there was like a very long journey. One, I never thought it was going to happen. I didn't intend for it to happen. Two, I didn't think I would end up on CNN. The only reason I ended up on CNN, and this is just an example just to kind of complete your point, a guy named Graham Wood wrote an article called What ISIS Really Wants for Atlantic Magazine. You can look it up. It was the most popular article in the history of the Atlantic Monthly. Now, Graham Wood has no idea what he's talking about. He literally knows nothing. And the audacity is amazing. Imagine I was to write an article on what Christianity really is. Who am I to write that article? Like, I would have to study a religion for years to even begin to say, like, who Christians really are. Do you see what I'm saying? Like, that's the whole value of an education, is that you begin to learn how much you don't know. And you have some humility, right? That's the whole value of education, right? Now, he wrote this article. The article is terrible. A very good friend of mine, he does a lot of media work, right? His name is Wajahat Ali. You might have heard of him. He said to me, write an article for a website, Salon. He said, just respond to this. Whatever, just write like 1,000 words, respond. I guarantee you, it'll make a difference. And I was on a train to Washington, D.C. I was working, I was busy, and he just kept pushing me. He's like, write it, write it, write it. I'm telling you, write it. And I wrote it, and the reason people read the article is because everyone was reading his article. And people were angry, so they wanted a response. And I wrote a 1,000-word response on how ridiculous this is. And I just said, you're talking about ISIS, and you never once talked about the Iraq War. I'm like, if you invade any country in the world 5 times with vastly superior military force, what do you think is going to happen? Right? Like, how did Nazi Germany come about? World War I ended, and European powers imposed onerous peace terms on Germany and bankrupted the country, and then you got the Nazis. Doesn't mean the Nazis are good people, obviously, right? But like, there's historical causes. It's not like suddenly like a bunch of Muslims just went crazy for no reason, right? Is that like 30 or 40 years of war like screw up a person's brain, right? And that's the article I wrote. Like, this is ridiculous. How can you write an article about ISIS and not talk about the Iraq War? It makes absolutely no sense to me. So I wrote the article, and then I went on CNN. And I did like a 1-minute segment with him on CNN, and it's fine. Thoda sa, thapad kiya, like it was fun, right? And 2 months later, I was in a meeting with a bunch of CNN people saying, how do we change how we cover Muslims? So it was literally one article that someone told me to write that I didn't even want to write, that led to a 1-minute interview. And then since then, I go on like once every few weeks, every time. But when I'm telling you this is to say that just if you keep doing the work, it will be noticed. And like, it's been 18 years that I've been doing this, so it's not like it's going to be overnight, and that can be frustrating. But if you believe in it and you believe it's important, it will make an impact. Okay, thank you very much for your time, for your patience, and for listening to me. I hope you enjoyed the lecture, you appreciated it, you learned from it, and you're able to carry it through with the rest of your lives. Assalamu alaikum.